I'd like to welcome to the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy podcast, Miki Leon. Miki is right now speaking to me from Tel Aviv, Israel. Uh, Thankfully, she's not at the moment, I don't think, in a bomb shelter. And I think there are not rockets flying at the moment overhead, but obviously that could happen at any moment. We're in the middle of a war. And we're very grateful that she's taken a few minutes of her out of her busy schedule. Miki is the CEO of a family foundation that is very much invested in education in Israel, in particular in teachers and homeroom teachers, and really kind of like the nuts and bolts of helping our children flourish and helping the educational system grow. She's had a fascinating life trajectory, spent time in Israel, spent time in England, has spent time in media, spent time in high tech. So I'm looking forward very much to an engaging conversation with Miki Leon. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So let's jump right in. I always like to ask my guests just to share with us in a few brief words a little bit about themselves. Kind of who are you? Tell us a little bit. Tell our audience a little bit about who you are in your own words.
I think you did a pretty good job in the introduction. I will say I am the mother of two daughters. From my accent, you can see that I grew up in the UK. And I was born in Israel. I grew up in the UK. And then 15 years ago, when my two daughters were quite young, we came to Israel so that they would be immersed in a Jewish state. And really never left. So really enjoy bringing up my daughters in Israel. When I was in the UK, I worked in media. I worked for broadcasters, and I studied in the UK. But really, my family was I always called it like an island of Israel within the UK. So my parents moved over in 1970. And the whole time that I was growing up, they had the radio onto Israel. And the story is that my father was talking to a colleague of his in Haifa. And my father said to the colleague, "What's happening with the fire?" And the colleague said, "What fire?" And then he looked out of the window and he saw the fire.
That's great.
So that was our connection to Israel. It's always been very, very deep. We've always been brought up Israeli, even though we really grew up in the UK.
How common is that in the UK? I'm not as familiar with growing up in the UK as growing up in the States. Was that anomalous that your family was so connected to Israel amongst your peer families, or was it not so uncommon?
So, we were there a long time, so there's many answers to the questions. I think obviously there was a huge Jewish community, and there has been for a very long time. But the Israeli community in the 1970s, when I was growing up, there wasn't such a big Israeli community. But definitely in the 80s and 90s, particularly in the 90s, a lot of Israeli business people came to London. And there was a real community. Both my daughters went to Israeli kindergartens. So definitely that community has grown and flourished in the past couple of decades.
Would you say it was clear to you that it was unlikely that you personally were going to end up spending your whole life in London? Like you knew it was only a matter of time until you came back to Israel?
Such a good question. So the whole time, in Hebrew, we say we're on the suitcases. So when I was 14, I spoke to my mother and I said, "Listen, I've got some really serious matriculation exams in 2 years. Do you think we'll be here for those matriculation exams in the UK? Do I need to study for them?" So until the age of 14, I really thought any minute we could move back to Israel. And then and it was a serious question, I really thought, and suddenly I thought, oh, do I have to study for these exams or do I have to study for the Israeli exams?
Right.
And then my mother had to answer, "Listen, we're probably going to be here for the next few years." So we were always temporary residents in the UK. And I think also I'll add to that just to give the kind of zeitgeist that we were in. About 20 years ago, my parents started an Israeli business club for business people in England who were Israeli.
Mhm.
So they actually created that network for themselves, and then they supported Israel in that way.
Wow. Okay. Beautiful. So interesting. I'm very intrigued by your initial sojourn professionally into the area of media. We Jews know that, sadly, there are multiple battlefronts, right? There's the battlefront, of course, the real battlefront, the front lines, fighting for our people and our security and our defense. But then, of course, there's always the battle in the war of words, or the world of public opinion. I would argue that, thankfully, so far, there are many exceptions, but generally speaking, I don't remember there being so much support, such strong support for Israel in the media as there's been during the last, I don't know how many days it's been now, 2+ weeks, that we've been in this terrible circumstance. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into media, and maybe a little bit about your perspectives on, that war that's waged in the media.
Wow, I've thought and spoken about this so many times, but it's never been so existential. So I went into the media just because I loved the creative side of it, and actually I was more in the corporate side of it. But so straight from university, really, I started finding work in media, and I worked in really on the corporate side of two main broadcasters in the UK, which was Channel 4 and ITV. My husband worked at the BBC, so I always laughed that we covered all the kind of broadcasters between us during that time. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And from there, really in the 2000s, I moved on to working in .com. I love the internet. The first time I heard about the internet in the 90s, I loved it. I love the democratization of media, the interactivity. So really, since the 2000s, I've been working in digital media. I think around that time, there was a real sea change in the narrative about Israel. I think I date it in the late 80s with the first Intifada. And then 10 years later, really, I think the media is almost always going to have progressive, left-leaning people managing it. And I think that the pro-Palestinian narrative has been firmly embedded in that progressive left-wing group, which I always felt I belonged to, but have felt increasingly disenfranchised from. But I'll go back. So I think that really in 2000, especially around the incursion in Jenin in 2002, I think really there became this very strong backlash, and led by the media, where the overarching narrative has been very much the Palestinians as victims. I have a lot of criticism about that, because I think that even though some of the accusations may have been valid, I think there's been virtually no investigation of Palestinian leadership and very little criticism, which makes everything very uneven. Today, I'd like to mix some fact and narrative. So I recently got a poll from the UK, which polled UK support for Israel. Broadly speaking, usually 19% support Israel, 20% support Palestine, and 60% don't care.
Okay.
Or don't care or aren't engaged. And we need to remember that the silent majority, they could be thinking about us 1 minute, and within seconds, they're thinking about the next cup of tea. And really, we have to remember that that is the majority. So if you look at that, you could say potentially, our problem is 20% big. We know that statistically that's shifted a little bit in the past couple of weeks, and we now have 21% supporting Israel, 19% supporting the Palestinian story. Critical, but not the the story's better than we thought. Having said that, the most important thing for our situation today is to have leadership supporting us, leadership from the US, leadership from Europe, leadership from the UK supporting Israel. So we need that public opinion
Mhm.
to not stop the leadership from doing what they want to do.
Right.
So I think in one sense, the story is not as scary as it seems. And on the other sense, I think it's become more vital than it ever has done.
Mhm.
And it's a very different, you know, I have to share with you that I think the times that I found most difficult in the last couple of weeks, beyond the initial shock of what happened in the South, the most difficult times have been Anglo-Jewish people posting pro-Palestinian, worried about Gaza. I understand the humanitarian sentiment, but we hadn't even buried our dead yet.
Right.
We hadn't even picked everybody up yet.
Right.
And there's a machine here, and there's a zeitgeist here that is a big concern.
I hear it's overwhelming, and it's something I think about frequently. And in this regard, in the sense that we tend to often, I think, speak within our own echo chambers, in the sense that many of us post, pro-Israel, uh, inspiring, motivating, showing the good guys versus the bad guys, good versus evil. But there's this feeling of like preaching to the choir, and even people that go on, go on media, they tend to be speaking on the channels of media that tend to, be sympathetic. So I don't know if you have the answer to this. I don't know how we kind of like cross pollinate and how we kind of begin to like get our message to seep into those places that are, antagonistic. I don't even know if it's possible. It strikes me that sometimes that we're preaching to the choir.
I agree. I think it is one of the real concerns of our time. I think the amplification and separation of social media is a real curse, and we see it. And it's also brought many gifts, but it's a real curse. I can tell you on a local level, as a family and also as an individual, I've been involved in philanthropically, I've been involved in organizations that try to cross the aisle, shall we say,
Mhm.
that try to find those shared values that will help, and we've had the whole protest movement as well, trying to find those comrades that together we can build a shared society in Israel.
Mhm.
But I think it is the real scourge of our time. This separation and this the polarization. Absolutely.
I hear, yeah. Unfortunately, we're not going to solve all this, in one fell swoop. But it's, yeah, no, it's definitely, it's on our minds and in our hearts. Let's talk a little bit. I'm curious, it sounds like your family foundation is very much involved in education, right? I'm curious, kind
Yeah.
of how did that become the focus? Kind of what was the evolution of the founding of the foundation, and how did you make that kind of like the focal point of your philanthropic work?
So thank you for asking about that. I do want to say that our path, I've understood, is quite unusual, so I'd like to share it with you. I'll try and shorten the story.
Okay.
Really, I said that my family, my parents, they supported Israel from abroad for 40 years that we lived here. And then 10 years ago, my parents came back. And when the center of gravity of our family came back to Israel, my parents, who are really wonderful, basically said, we want to give meaningfully in Israel. We have the financial means to do so, and we want to do it together as a family. And they said two things. They said, we want our giving to be in Israel. That's absolutely one of the pillars of our giving. And the other one is education. We believe in education because if you help one person, if one person gets an education, they bring their whole family up with them.
Mhm.
We were new to Israel. We were new to wealth. we were new to education. You know, I have an aunt who was a teacher, but really, other than that, nothing. New to Israeli education, and I think we had modesty to say we don't have the answers. We're so new to all of this. We need to go through a process. So we contacted JFN, the Jewish Funders Network, which have been invaluable for us. And they took us through this process of really thinking through what our family is and what our values are, and are thinking about this. And then we created a learning portfolio. And this is, I think, quite unusual. We spent 3 years donating, giving actively to a portfolio of around 10 organizations in order to learn philanthropy in Israel. So we took a percentage, and you know, that's what we did for that time, and really just studied how do you make an impact? How do you work strategically and systematically to make a difference? And from those insights, 4 years ago, we decided within education to focus on teachers, and we decided to be highly focused. And we identified homeroom teachers. And the more I learn about this, the more I realize this is almost internationally true. You have homeroom teachers who see the entire picture of a child. They see the parents, they see the child, they see the classroom, they see the social interactions. And yet almost nowhere are they given the skills or even the professional identity to catch those children that fall between two stools. And we said, if we believe in equal opportunities and we want equal opportunities, we want a stronger society, we want to catch those children and not lose those potential great kids, we think homeroom teachers can be a major change agent. So this was the hypothesis. 4 years ago, we went to the Ministry of Education. We said, we want to put real money. We're going to work on developing programs. We're going to be developing training. We want to work with new homeroom teachers in their first year. And luckily, the Ministry of Education loved it. We've been very, very lucky. And we've been working hand in glove with the Ministry of Education on this for 3 years. Today, we have over 150 peer-to-peer learning communities of homeroom teachers. This year, if we start this academic year, we'll be working with over 3,000 homeroom teachers out of 30,000 in the primary, no, you don't call it primary, elementary school system. And really the way we work is facilitation of what is your professional personal identity as a homeroom teacher? How can we strengthen you? How can we improve you? And where can you take this to the children? We're doing this while at the same time there's a teacher crisis throughout the world, even before COVID, with COVID. But we find that at the moment, you know, once this war broke out, we're trying to be relevant. So we're trying to provide moments of community for our homeroom teachers to meet. We're bringing in speakers, inspirational speakers, people who help with resilience, and really trying to be there and relevant for our homeroom teachers.
It's so interesting. I'm observing this I'm very much involved and engaged in the not-for-profit space. And it's really interesting, just kind of from the outside a little bit, just to observe and see how organizations not-for-profits are adapting. Some not-for-profits are, you know, I'll pick one. I'm very good friends with Ellie Beer from United Hatzalah. So, you know, they don't really need to pivot, right? They're on the front lines. You know, it's their mission all the time. Now it's just intensified, right? So I don't think that needs a lot of explanation to most thinking people why that needs, you know, tremendous support, you know, in the critical time we're in. But then there are people that are kind of, it's interesting, people that are kind of a little more attenuated, like people that work on education in America, for example. I'm very familiar with organizations that do things to strengthen education in America. And they're doing a huge campaign now to strengthen and facilitate security for our institutions. Like, it's interesting. You have to like think creatively and out of the box. I work in particular with special needs children. And, you know, we have to kind of figure out, you know, how we're adapting or where that, you know, what our part is in terms of contributing to the war effort. Everybody is we're one arm and we're in one nation. So it's interesting. I like the comparison you're making to COVID in the sense that many of us are familiar with this. There's a familiarity to this kind of to this state of we have
emergency
to do something, right? We have to. We're not what we're doing. What we've been doing is not going to work for the current moment, right?
Yeah. So I think also with COVID, we found this, and really, I mean, we're talking 2 weeks in with no advance warning. There are really big differences. So I can talk to you really from a family perspective. We looked at the situation and we said, first of all, we released emergency funds supporting people, mostly troops on the front line. That's as a family, nothing to do with our strategic foundation or any, what do people need now, and it's been tactical wartime equipment that they needed. And here I can actually compare it to COVID, because we saw this as a philanthropic community also happening with COVID, that the first 3 or 4 weeks, the civil society and the philanthropic society needed to fill that gap until the state could take action. And special needs kids were absolutely there, and children of first workers, first line workers.
Right.
Yeah, all of this, we did immediately. And then within 3 or 4 weeks, and we're already seeing it in Israel, you could see the state coming into where the state needed to come in, right? Stuff that really the philanthropic world can't support, but it could do that stopgap. So I think we're kind of beginning to come out of that phase now in this emergency situation. And then from that, we came back as a family and we said, right, we kind of have 3 paths that we look at. One is, first of all, support our own. There's lots of organizations that we've been working with for 3 years. They are charities. They are people who, by definition, will always work almost precariously. They're dependent on donations. So for all the charities that we work with, we gave them an installment straight away to say, guys, don't worry about cash flow. Don't worry about salaries.
Beautiful.
We're in a state of nobody knows what's going to happen. At least you don't have to worry about that. And I think, that's something that philanthropy can do very well. So we did that for the organizations that we work with. Secondly, we decided as a family which are the areas that we feel we can be impactful for what's needed right now. And, there's a few organizations that we're giving that are really, about mental health, helping our soldiers, and also the Hasbara, which we talked about a little bit, really getting a bit more involved in that, which is, not necessarily to do with education, although the mental health might cross over eventually. And then really just being there for our teachers, being there for the people, we gave them a platform. We've been giving them a platform for the last 3 years. We have one teacher, amazing, Ofra from Sderot. She didn't want to leave, and then she couldn't leave because her son had a special diet and she didn't think she could sustain it. And we said, listen, you're doing so much. She was on the TV all the time. And we said, right, let's get you out of Sderot. We'll sort out the diet, we'll sort out the food. So really it's that kind of very humanitarian, and I think also in situations of emergency, and if you want to move fast, which I think is really, really the name of the game, moving fast is best with the people that you know. Mm-hmm. So we don't start new projects that we don't know anyone. We're not looking to do due diligence. We do quite a lot of due diligence. Right. No, if we know you and we understand the need and it aligns with what we want to see, what we think is important, we can release the money quite quickly. So I think really it's about being sensitive, being reactive, and still being quite focused, because it's overwhelming. The need is I have to say, on a personal level, the first 2 weeks, the needs were beyond really what civil society can give, and you just felt like you couldn't give enough. And really, as somebody who's philanthropical, you want to do good things in the world. Your job in the world is to spread good stuff.
Right, right.
And in this terrible situation where that no matter what you do, you're not going to bring back those people that we lost, we are really, we're operating in tragedy. I mean, really, that's where we are right now.
If we can, I'd like to continue that conversation a little bit. Just, this is going to be a little bit off the cuff. This is the first interview that I'll be releasing with somebody, on the ground in Israel post events of October 7th. We're hopefully going to have many more in the days and weeks to come, speaking to others as well. So I don't mean hopefully this will all end soon, but I mean hopefully in the sense that we want to focus all of our energies in our small way at the JPP to support the situation in Israel. We're all following the news. We're all listening, where we get our information from. But it sounds like, through your philanthropic arm, you definitely have seen or touched or felt kind of the emergency needs. Maybe just if you would, a little bit, to a degree that you're comfortable, share with us a little bit some of the things you've seen, you've heard, you've touched. Just help us kind of help galvanize us to continue to do all that we can in these efforts.
It's not a philanthropic thing. It's a personal thing. It's anybody who has a connection to Israel. We're getting up off our knees with the grief and the shock. And I think really, for many of us, this giving and supporting and keeping up the home front, that we know that's, when I speak to soldiers, they're saying, we just need to know that your spirits are up so that we can focus on what we're doing. Israel has to be so resolute with what's coming up and what we're facing, having just experienced a horror, to be that kind of resolute. And I think it's upon us to stay strong and support the so that they don't have to worry, so our soldiers don't have to worry about us.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that we can do. I mean, I can tell you where we're focusing now, and the personal and the strategic are all mixed up. I don't know many people who haven't been to funerals. I don't know many people who haven't seen that loss. And like I said, we can't bring them back. What we can do
for a second, just if I may, to me, there's a certain, dissonance in the sense that, on the one hand, Israeli society is such that, I've heard interviews with soldiers on the front line, and they've all said, like, like when they were asked the question, did you ever think, this could happen? The answer always is yes. Like, we've always prepared. We always knew that one day we'd get called up. Like, that's kind of like a mantra that I've heard from many, many soldiers. On the other hand, it's so impossible to believe that something like this happened to us, in our homeland, at this time. Like, so it's really, there's a certain cognitive dissonance that, right, you're describing, just the shock.
One of the things, we're a land of heroes. I mean, really, we are a land of heroes. I don't know what we have in the water here. I don't know what we've been feeding our kids, but really, 170% reservist sign up. Our fate on the shoulders of 19 and 20-year-olds. These are kids the same age as my kids. They're friends and friends of my kids. And they are resolute. They have seen, especially the ones who have seen what went on, they have no doubt that they're going to protect us from that happening again. So we are focused, we are resolute, and we are heartbroken simultaneously. And that's what we need to have. Those are the tools we have, right? I mean, just the focus and the heart. And really, anything that what we're doing is we're supporting soldiers. So I'm talking about the initial needs. The initial needs were like kit, basically gear, fighting gear. That's changed. But we have to remember that many of these soldiers and many of these reservists who hadn't seen action for years had to pack in an hour.
Right. It's
They
crazy.
so they don't have underwear, they don't have socks, they don't have, deodorant, they don't have toothpaste.
Right.
People who were in their bases on that weekend, they came to the base last week for a week and they stayed Shabbat. But now they're going to have to, then some of them have been there 3 weeks. That's girls. The army has more female Kravi fighters than we ever had in any previous war. They have those needs as well. So I think that is going to be ongoing, and we're supporting that. I think there has been a state failure and the civil society has stepped in.
Right.
And that has been incredible. I would advise anybody to go to the expo in Tel Aviv and see what Brothers in Arms, the logistics center that they've created there almost overnight. I mean, you want to feel proud. That is pride. Getting that stuff out there. I mean, there's lots of local logistics centers. Almost every neighborhood seems to have 3 or 4 places where you can donate and give. And I have no towels left, no sheets left, no mattresses left. They've all gone.
Wow.
So there's that. The other area, I'd mentioned mental health. We have families who've been crushed and devastated. The state is helping them, but we know this is a long term. I think COVID created a mental health crisis throughout the world, especially with teenagers. We hear it everywhere. Now we've really created a new mental health crisis, but we're all in denial. We're not dealing with what happened yesterday. We have to deal with what's coming tomorrow.
Right.
But really ramping that up, really, so that we have the support system that people need for whatever's coming now. And the people who are operating these are all people whose children might be on the front line or partners might be on the front line. And really, for us, again, getting that support for Israel through the Hasbara. I mean, there's other areas that people are working in, and it's all important. But I think for us, the education side isn't so relevant now, but it will be relevant very shortly, because you have all these displaced kids, all these evacuees, internal evacuees in our country, all these children whose life has been ripped apart within hours. They're going to need that support, and we're already working with the Ministry of Education to how to set that up.
I find that when I begin to unpack, in conversation with my wife, like just like talking in the house, like when you start to unpack all the levels and layers around vacations and points of impact, it's completely it's overwhelming. You can't even
It's overwhelming.
overwhelming. It is overwhelming.
Yeah.
How many layers and levels that need to be rebuilt and need to be addressed. And like you said, I think very poignantly, like we really can't go back there right now, even, right? We don't have the time or energy to focus on blame at the moment. We don't have time to focus on, other than dealing with the immediate of the crisis, like, because there's a lot coming in front of us, right? And the reckoning will come at some point, but it's just but I think you're right in terms of there's this duality of like the immediate needs, and then there's also those in this philanthropic space who are sensitive, understand that there's going to be long-term hashtlachot and repercussions that are going to need to be addressed on a societal level. I want to, one quick thing you meant, this is just my own ignorance, but do we actually have female Kravi, we have female soldiers today that are like in the in the frontal units that are fighting? And I wasn't aware.
To be honest, I don't know enough about this. Some of my daughter's friends are Kravi, and I haven't even asked that very good question of them. I'm not quite
Oh,
sure.
sure.
I was in the infantry. I was in Golani. When
What
I,
does that
but
mean
I was
what does that mean you were in Golani? That means you were
no,
actually a football player?
I was really support for the soldiers. I was like, but I was with the infantry. So I don't know how it works, but I know that we have more girls who are in the bases, and if we used to be very far behind,
They're fighter
but I
pilots.
do
I'm
just,
sure there's female fighter pilots today, if I'm
oh
not
yeah, yeah, oh, yeah.
mistaken.
And there's women who are teaching how to, the tanks units and artillery units. There's
Right.
women threaded throughout the army, much more than there ever were. But I do just want to say one thing about, you're talking about being overwhelmed, and I'll just take that kind of step back. People have kept asking, that the question that we can, how do you ask somebody how are they? How are you? It's such a difficult question to answer right now. And I think really what we are is falling apart and piecing ourselves back together again, really on a moment by moment basis.
Mhm.
There we fall and then we just pick up, and the resilience is incredible or inspiring.
Wow. It's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that. You know, I've also been observed. I read a lot of emails, and I've been like, usually like in a normal time, it's like, "Hi, hope all is well." Like you can't write to somebody, "Hope all is well" right now. Like nobody
Yeah,
in their right mind is well. So I've been
yeah,
paying attention also to how people are like writing their emails. So I actually right now, I start like this. I say, "Dear Mickey, I don't have the words to even I don't have the words to open this email. I don't that's
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
I don't have the words to even, write an opening to this email, but I will let you know why I'm reaching out today. Like it's it
yeah,
needs acknowledgement, right? I've seen people say, I hope you're doing as well as you possibly can be doing in the current predicament. Like whatever it is, but it goes exactly to what you're saying. Like we life has changed dramatically, right? Like that, right? In a moment's notice, without being prepared for it. And there are it's a trauma. It's a trauma that the Jewish people have suffered uh, throughout the entirety of the world. Certainly those closest to it in Israel, most closely, but those of us who care deeply about Israel and about its people and about the Jewish future. So we've all been shaken to our core. And like you said, we're still very much not even beginning to unpack. We're all dealing with this in real time, and it's a process. And hopefully, some of these conversations bring comfort to people that are going through what we're all going through, which is that we're doing the best we can in very, very
yeah.
trying.
I will tell you from, I kind of flipped between on a personal level and really from a philanthropic
Right,
lens.
right,
From a philanthropic lens, one of the things that we said, if we were ever saving for a rainy day, if you ever thought, I'll wait until,
right.
now's the time. Like now is the time. The support for Israel is so important. And there'll be more. I was speaking to somebody on the front line. I kind of sent him a message on Shabbat just to say Shabbat Shalom, and I hope you're keeping well. And he said, my head is absolutely on where I am now. We're on that front line, we know what's ahead of us. But he comes from a kibbutz in the south, and he said, I need people like you for when we rebuild.
Right.
They're already on the rebuilding, and that's what we do, right? We rebuild the house over and over again. So really, it's kind of being in the moment and gathering the strength that we need for what we need to be here to keep a Jewish state.
I'll just mention on the philanthropic front, I've seen just some numbers thrown around in North America, whether it's federations or other organizations, eye-popping numbers that have been raised, close to $1 billion. And then hearing people say like it's going to be spent very quickly. Like it's not like it's unfathomable, kind of like the amounts of resources that are so critical and so necessary, now and will be continue, that will continue to be for the
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true, and really people's generosity and support. I can't even tell you what a difference it makes to have that. And I've seen it in the US and in the UK, and people rushing. Really, how can I help was probably the thing I heard the most, and probably the thing I say the most. In these weeks. But there's bigger forces at play, and it really is just this moving ground, helping where you need until the state comes in, helping when you need until something gets organized, and also knowing the urgent takes over anything more important or anything. It's urgent.
And just to contextualize, so in your lifetime, we've all lived, I guess, through different crises. I mean, does this strike you as like the biggest challenge you've seen in your lifetime vis-a-vis the state of Israel?
So I want to be careful with that question. And actually, somebody on the news said this the other day, that at the moment, we've been hit very hard, but I'm not sure we're in an existential crisis.
Okay.
And we are many millions of people here on this land. It's not so easy. No, it's not 600,000 people, which it was in Yom Kippur War. We're here.
Mm.
We've had COVID. We've had the protest, which felt very existential. Actually, as a crisis, it felt very much like we could be torn apart. And now we've had this. So I'm being careful. In terms of pain, nothing's come close.
Mm-hmm.
I pray to God nothing will ever come this close again. I look at my daughter's generation. She's 19. Her teens were taken away by COVID. And I hope that their mental health won't be taken away by this. And I hope their lives won't be taken away by this. I can't think bigger than that, because we don't know. We're speaking, you and I are now speaking at this very tense moment. We've been holding our breath for 2 weeks. We don't know are things going to happen in the north, what's going to happen in the south, when our soldiers are going to go in, what our leadership is, what the international support will be. So all these things are lining up. It's, it feels like destiny, but I don't know where, I don't know what the size is. And I think this kind of living without knowing and living in this question mark, that I think we're really good at. That I think that's something we've developed.
Excellent point. That's really a really excellent answer. Thank you so much for that. We'll wind down with this. I'm just curious, as a proud American citizen, and obviously somebody who spent many years in Israel and deeply aligned with Israel as well, and invest and care about the, at least the American Israel alliance, and certainly, it's other countries as well. I'm curious just what your thoughts were in terms of President Biden coming to Israel last week. Just maybe that meant a lot, maybe it didn't mean a lot. I mean, this is a personal question, everybody has different viewpoints on it. I'm just curious.
I will tell you how it felt. And I'm sorry for the people who support Netanyahu, but I don't think he's been functioning in this crisis. I think he's a man of many abilities, but they're not coming to the front. And we felt like, thank goodness, there's a responsible adult. And his words meant so much to us, and I'm not American. So
Right.
His words, his unequivocal support, his empathy for the survivors, but not only that, also his empathy from 9/11. When he said, don't make the mistakes that we made, just showed how deeply we're aligned. I think we are in quite a crazy situation where really we're seeing our Western values meet religious warfare. You know, this is medieval. This is fanaticism, right? This is what we're meeting. We're meeting fanaticism. This is kind of a medieval kind of religious war. It's not our religious war, but it's their religious war. And our aligned values and our enlightened way of thinking, that's who we are. That's what we're fighting for. And to have somebody come and talk to that meant the world. I'd like to add that the emails that I've gotten from friends who say, we support you, we're thinking of you, have also been essential. It makes a difference.
Amazing. I've just on a very small level of my own, I've been taking it upon myself to reach out to many of my relationships and acquaintances in Israel, some who I haven't really spoken to in many years, but I can tell just from the response that it's meaningful to people, that when you're going through a tremendous trial, you don't want to feel alone. That just exacerbates what's already a very
I want to say something about that. You know, there's so much about war crimes and humanitarian crisis and all this kind of conversation. And this is how I feel at the moment. You know, I'm sorry, you're meeting somebody in a very raw time, so you're getting things very raw. You know, the UN, Amnesty International, the Red Cross, thousands of bodies, and we clean them up ourselves. We cleaned up this mess. We are, if it wasn't for the States and now the European Union and the UK, we would really be on our own. Something that we didn't look for, something, and it's a very sad place to be when you're mourning. So any reaching out, any support is precious.
Right. It's funny. It's, again, funny is not the right word, but it's ironic that, on the one hand, like, let's say we collectively like take great pride in Israel's strength and independence and startup nation, and we don't really need other people type of, feeling, in the good times. Right. But a tragedy does unravel the reality that, that nobody can really stand alone. United States can't stand alone. Everybody needs allies. This is what President Biden said the other night, right? It's like you need allies, right? And we need allies on the global stage, and we need allies on the interpersonal stage as well. So I appreciate, and I'll say also President Biden, like you mentioned about Netanyahu, President Biden has he has milos and chesronos. He has like any person, he has areas of greater strength or greater weakness, but certainly comforter in chief. Sadly, because of his own personal biography, I would argue that he really has excellent empathic skills, because he knows firsthand what it means to lose family members, to have family members so close to you ripped away and taken from you. So there's no question that Hashem puts the right people in the right places at the right time. We don't always understand why, but I do think that some of his greatest attributes are shining forth at the moment, and with God's help, it should continue to shine forth and to give us the cover and support we need until we accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Miki, I want to thank you so much for making the time for this conversation. It was very poignant and insightful and impactful, and I look forward to sharing it with others to inspire and uplift and to engage and to help in any way that we can from afar our brothers and sisters that are suffering so much at this current juncture. So thank you for making the time.
Thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it.